Yeah. Okay. Oh, you know what helped? Can you turn that one light switch nearest the door off? I'm sure they love to hear this on the recording. Yeah, it usually is. Okay, let me talk to you about the endocrine system. Okay, control systems. We're talking about systems that are used to control everything about your human body. We've dealt with the conscious part of that, although if you did the autonomic lecture, if you worked your way through that, that controls a lot of the unconscious things that go on in your human body. And that autonomic system does a lot of its work through this endocrine system. Now let's first think about what this endocrine means, because there are exocrine glands and endocrine glands in the human body. Now glands are tissues that produce or secrete substances. When you contrast the word exocrine with endocrine, the exo part of the word is going to relate to the word exit, like to leave. So glands that are exocrine, their secretions are typically collected into little tubes. These fluids do not go out throughout the body. They're collected into pockets and tubes, and those lead out of the human body. So exocrine, like exit, like leaving. Like your sweat would be a common one here. Right? You've got sweat glands that produce the sweaty fluid, and the fluid collects in a tube, and the tube leads to the surface of your skin. Endocrine glands, on the other hand, the endo word is like the word into, inside your body. These secretions are typically released into your tissues, into your bloodstream, and they can circulate throughout the body. So exocrine versus endocrine. Just a little bit more on exocrine glands. Sweat glands, sebaceous glands, apocrine glands. This is sort of the picture here is the skin with the connective tissue, the dermis removed, and the nerve endings and that. So we just have the hair follicle here and some of the glands. And there's sweat glands, coiled tubes that lead out. Sebaceous glands, oil-producing glands associated with the hair follicle that lubricates the hair and the surface of the skin. And even apocrine glands, not everywhere, but places like armpits and other areas that produce part of what we think of as BO, body odor and all. But these are all glands that are leaving the body. Some glands like the pancreas or other digestive glands or ones in the stomach that produce acid are producing fluids that leave the body. Okay? Did an extensive lecture on cavities and membranes and all of that. And when we talked about tubes through the human body, the inside of the tube is outside the body, geographically. If I took something from my body and put it into the digestive tube, it would leave the human body. And so really the inside of this tube is outside of the body. So all these sorts of glands are producing substances that leave the body. There's always some sort of tubular structure that's collecting the fluids and directing them to an outside surface, to an epithelial tissue. So that's exocrine glands. Now endocrine glands produce internal substances. Right? These substances enter the bloodstream. They're carried everywhere throughout the human body. Right? And every cell receives these. Yep.
Doesn't that mean the pancreas is both?
Yes, and we'll get to the pancreas in just a little bit. Yes. Yes, it is. Okay. So, endocrine glands, this is what we want to focus. It's a system of glands throughout the human body. They work together in many cases, and they produce hormones. Hormones are regulatory substances. Substances with a message. A chemical substance that has some kind of effect on tissues in the human body. They can cause actions in other body tissues. We need to know that these glands, too, this whole endocrine system is under the control of the nervous system. Woohoo! So, things that happen in the brain affect, and you know, the pituitary gland. We saw that connected to the hypothalamus. And then this directs activities down to all sorts of other parts of the human body. Maybe you remember, if we go all the way back, when we talked about the autonomic nervous system, right? We said that the hypothalamus and the medulla oblongata were key players here. And we think of the hypothalamus as mainly directing chemical activities. And this is where we get the endocrine system. Remember, the medulla was mechanical, muscular kinds of activities like heart rate, digestion, blood pressure, breathing, things like that. But this is where we're focusing, and we can see that the hypothalamus is going to control the endocrine system through the pituitary gland. Now, it might be useful here to just think about common ways that we communicate things that we need to communicate throughout our world. The nervous system and the endocrine system are both communicating systems. But you might want to think that the nervous system functions sort of like our wired telephones. And I'm rapidly losing the use of this analogy because lots of people don't even have a wired telephone anymore, right? It's all wireless. But please think of wired telephones here as an analogy for your nervous system, and the postal service as an analogy for your endocrine system. Communication here is instantaneous. The messages that you communicate travel through wires, like the axons of the nervous system. You can control things very rapidly and communicate throughout the human body very rapidly here. Letters that you write are just as communicative. These have a message to say, just like your conversation on the phone, but this takes time. This is slow. There's a transportation system, a whole delivery system involved here to get the messages where they want to go. This is your endocrine system. Your body doesn't use this for anything rapid. It uses the endocrine system for things that it can take care of slowly over time. Okay? So you want to think of hormones as messages. It's just which kind of messages. When you think about hormones and their messages, some languages that we use in messaging are universal and some are very specific. You know, if you were to speak of a universal language today, you'd pretty much say English. If a person knows English, they can pretty much go anywhere in the world and find somebody that they can communicate through. It's sort of the language of business and commerce in the world. And so if there's any one language that is, it's going to be English. But there are specific languages in many different places. And sometimes people don't understand another language. The same is true for hormones. Right? The hormones that your different glands produce, some of those hormones, since they are messages, some of them can be understood by all the cells in the human body, and some hormones can only be understood by certain little target groups of cells, certain tissues. So the messages essentially go everywhere, don't they? Now, I think of, if hormone is like our mail system, hormones are junk mail. Okay? Junk mail goes to everybody, doesn't it? If you want to advertise something, you send it to everybody. Hormones in the human body travel everywhere. They reach all, if you put them in the bloodstream, they're going to get to every single cell. But, like junk mail written in a certain language, only certain people or only certain cells are going to understand that. What if I did a piece of junk mail in German and I sent it to everybody's home? An awful lot of people would throw it in the trash. It would be meaningless to them. But people that can speak German could respond to and act on that because they understand the language. Same thing is true with hormones. Although hormones reach every cell in the human body, if it's a targeted hormone, many of the cells will just go, huh? What? I have no understanding of what that hormone means. But the tissues that certain hormones are meant for, they will be able to respond to that directive, right? So many hormones are universal and many other hormones are targeted. We call them targeted, right? When we think about this in terms of the endocrine system and the autonomic nervous system, remember autonomic was a simple system. Most processes either increase in activity or decrease in activity. The sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system typically increases things like heart rate and breathing. The parasympathetic side slows those. You need to boost an activity or lower an activity in order to keep it at a steady state. And hormones affect all of these sorts of chemical activities throughout the human body and cause them to increase or decrease. Okay? Just reiterating this whole thing, hormones are targeted to certain tissues. When we speak of target tissues, one example might be where the hypothalamus will produce some hormones that only the pituitary gland can understand. Some of the directives that the hypothalamus gives to its pituitary gland is chemical in nature. And it communicates through the bloodstream. It puts them into the bloodstream. They travel by the pituitary. They cause effects. But then they also travel everywhere throughout the human body. They just don't have any meaning anywhere else. Right? The pituitary gland controls many of the other glands that you see here. And many of its hormonal messages are meant only for certain glands. And every other tissue in the human body is just like, what? Huh? I don't understand that. And then other hormones, they're universal ones, like many of these glands that you see here put out hormones that affect every cell in the human body. The pituitary gland puts out a growth hormone. Every cell in the human body basically responds to that. The hormones that are put out for metabolism, okay, are responded to by all cells in the human body, basically. So we want to get this concept of, universal versus targeted hormones. Now let's take some time and let's go through the glands here. If this was physiology, we'd be talking about how each hormone works. You'd be learning all the hormones. You'll do that in physiology. Here you should be able to name and locate the glands, and you should be able to tell basically what each gland is about. For example, let's start with the pituitary. We've looked at it before. Pituitary, of course, is connected to the hypothalamus. You just want to think of it as the master gland. Right? The hypothalamus is capable of controlling so many chemical activities because it's got right in its hand the master gland. Master gland, the pituitary, produces more hormones, more different kinds of hormones than any other gland. And it regulates the action of many, many other glands in the hormonal system. It's actually a dual gland. There's an anterior part that is truly sort of the endocrine part, and there's actually the posterior part of it is part of the nervous system. But both the anterior and the posterior part produce hormones that have effects throughout the human body. Some of the hormones are universal, like the growth hormone comes from the anterior pituitary there, and some are targeted for control of other tissues and glands. So basically, think of the pituitary as the master gland. You would also know this second gland. Remember the pineal gland or pineal body, right? Back there in the epithalamus. And we spoke of this before, so this is kind of just going over it again. Your waking, sleeping cycles And you probably should know this hormone because we've mentioned it before. There aren't going to be many hormones that I'll mention here, but we'll mention melatonin, right? People use it for jet lag. We can produce it now in our biotech labs, and so you can buy it in the drugstore. And it basically is produced when your body starts recognizing that it's getting dark. You know, when we start losing light in our world, melatonin production starts increasing, and that's relaxing your body and getting it ready to rest. As you make your way down the human body, the thyroid gland is probably next. It's in the neck. You can see that it sort of envelops the trachea just below the larynx, right? It's a dual-lobed gland. It's got two big lobes and connecting bridge. And it's all about metabolism. Okay, the hormones that are produced here are under the control of the pituitary. Pituitary produces hormones that controls the thyroid. The thyroid then deals with energy production and your general metabolism, keeping your body running at a certain pace. The byproduct of this is heat. And so your hypothalamus, one of the things your hypothalamus can do is if your body is cooling, the hypothalamus has a set point. It can recognize that your body is cooling. And one of the ways it can heat you back up is to tell the thyroid gland to produce more hormones that will make the entire body produce a little bit more energy, or use the energy to produce a little bit more heat. This is one of those places where disorders of the thyroid gland produce some different kinds of changes. There's both a hypothyroidism, where you have too little, and a hyperthyroidism, where you would be producing too much. Generally here you won't see much in the way of a thyroid gland. In hyperthyroidism, usually the gland increases in size and the person's neck swells, and you get this. For example, here's two people, how they looked before they were hypothyroid. So if you look like at this woman, look at her now, and here's what she looks like in her hypothyroid. What would hypothyroid be doing to you? If you were, what? Gaining weight, because I'm not burning up all that excess energy, right? Okay, I'm not burning off the energy, so I would be gaining some weight here. My energy level would be low, kind of be tired, right? So more the lethargic, more tired, a little more weight gain. This gentleman here, right? You can see sort of the weight gain in his face, and just kind of, sort of the drooping eyelids, just that tiredness. Now, hyperthyroidism is just kind of coming right at you, isn't it? Right? This is real classic, sort of the bulging eyes, really, a little bit hyperactive, nervous, fidgety. And notice the neck. See how large? You can really see the thyroid gland right through the neck there. Right? That's hyperthyroidism. Gland is swollen, producing lots of the thyroid hormone and increasing metabolism throughout the body. Associated with the thyroid gland are 4 little parathyroid glands. They're around the back side, so they're not easily seen. And these specifically deal with calcium. You know that calcium is the most abundant mineral in your human body. We've already talked about how many different things it's involved with. The hardness of your bones, the contraction trigger for your muscles. It's the pH buffer, calcium, I want to say calcium hydroxide. Calcium chloride in the bloodstream is the basic chemical that is used to keep pH from, varying too much. So calcium is abundant. Keeping the right amount of calcium in the bloodstream is critical. And so the parathyroid hormones help manage the storage and the release of calcium throughout the human body. If you don't have enough calcium for buffering the blood, you'll take it out of your bones. You know, hardness of your bones is important, but your body will rob that before it'll let go of any of these other activities. So you should be familiar with the parathyroid glands. Thymus gland, we've mentioned this before when we were dissecting the cat. We saw it sitting over the heart, right up here, just above the heart in this location. And we know that it has to do with the immune system. All right, so just relate the thymus gland to the immune system. The pancreas is a dual gland, okay? Both exocrine and endocrine. When you look at it, the bulk of what you see is the exocrine portion of it producing digestive enzymes collected into tubes, dumped into the duodenum of the small intestine. But dotted throughout it, like little islands in an archipelago, are little tiny lumps of endocrine gland. They're called the islets of Langerhans, typically, or the pancreatic islets. And the exocrine part, the digestive part of the pancreas, produces those enzymes, but the endocrine part produces hormones for sugar metabolism. You know, if you ask somebody to name a hormone in the human body, probably the first one they would name is insulin, right? Insulin, related to diabetes. Insulin is produced by these little islets. The islets also produce a second hormone, and the two hormones then regulate sugar production. Glucagon dumps sugar into the bloodstream. Insulin takes sugar out of the bloodstream. So you can totally control the amount of sugar in the bloodstream from the hormones that are produced by the islets in the pancreas. So want to think here, as we're thinking of the hormone side of things, you're thinking, when you hear pancreas, you're thinking sugar metabolism. Okay? Good? Coming down, also in the abdominal pelvic cavity, are the adrenal glands. Some textbooks, apparently the name is becoming suprarenal glands because they sit above the kidneys. What's interesting about them, they are also a dual gland. There's two glands in one, but they're both endocrine. Pancreas was endocrine, exocrine. This is both endocrine. There's a cortex and a medulla. The cortex produces steroids and cortisol, different corticoid hormones. Steroids are part of the hormones that regulate body structure. They're typically androgenic. In fact, this is how your body knows whether to make itself into a male or a female. You do have a genetic code that's supposed to dictate that. But it's interesting to note that the basic body plan is female. Right? When up to about 6 weeks in the womb, when the embryo is about 6 weeks old, it's not male or female in looks yet. At that point, the cortex of the adrenal glands, which is developed, if it's a male genetic structure, this will start producing male hormones that will then influence the development of the genitalia into male structures. In the absence of that, without the Y chromosome, the absence of that, then the body just continues to develop in the female pattern. So, and then the cortisol helps control the inflammation response. Very important for your body to respond in an inflammatory way to certain things that are going on, infections, wounds, things. But sometimes, like a fire, it can get out of control. And so you have to have a natural fire extinguisher in your human body, and it's the corticoids. If you have some sort of rash or skin irritation or something, typically you go and get some cortisone cream and put it on there, and it decreases the inflammatory response. Your body has some of that naturally. The medulla, on the other hand, is sort of what the gland is known for. The medulla is what produces the adrenaline, which we think of as that hormone that revs you up, gets you all sympathetically stimulated. So this is a dual gland, but both glands, both parts are endocrine. And then finally, down in the pelvic cavity are the sex glands, the ovaries and the testes. They produce the sex hormones. Of course, the testes are going to create secondary sexual characteristics, like males typically have more hair on their body, and the ovaries are going to produce secondary sexual characteristics for females, as well as controlling the menstrual cycle. Both ovaries and testes are under control of the pituitary. Pituitary is telling them what to do, and then they're doing it. So these are the endocrine glands, right? You ought to be able to pick them out in a picture. You ought to be able to tell just kind of basically what this gland is controlling within the human body, right? You don't need to know all the hormones. I mentioned just a couple of them, the more well-known ones. But you should be able to tell me a little bit about the glands, okay? Any questions here? That was good, simple, all right.